Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, the show covering all things health, wellness, culture, and more. The show for all of us who aren't old, we're better. Each week, we'll interview superstars, experts, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, all related to this wonderful experience of getting better, not older. Now, here's your host, the award-winning Paul Vogelzang.
Welcome to the Not Old Better Show Fitness Friday interview series. Today's episode is brought to you by Acorns. Acorns makes it easy for everyone to start saving and investing. I'm Paul Vogelzang, and today we're talking about something that affects all of us: how we stay strong, energized, and truly fit as we age. Think about this. After 40, the average person loses 7% of their lean muscle mass each decade. Wow. Our metabolism slows, our joints feel different, and for many, workouts that once worked just don't anymore. But what if we could turn that around? What if fitness in our 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond wasn't about limitations, but about possibilities? Our guest today is Aaron Leventhal. He's an author, he's an expert exerciser, fitness trainer. He knows exactly how to make that happen. He's going to share that with us. He's a former professional soccer player, along with everything else. He is an elite performance coach, and now he's a cancer survivor. Aaron has spent 25 years helping people from pro athletes to everyday movers break through fitness plateaus. And now, with his new book available at Apple Books, The New Fit, How to Own Your Fitness Journey in Your 40s, 50s, and Beyond. He's redefining what it means to be strong at any age. Today, Aaron Leventhal is here to shatter myths. He's here to share some science-backed training strategies and explain why the key to lasting fitness isn't just about working out harder, it's about working out smarter. Whether you're an athlete looking to maintain your edge or someone who wants to feel good getting up the stairs, this episode is for you. So be smart, listen up, get ready for an eye-opening conversation that could change how you move for the rest of your life. Please join me in welcoming author, fitness exercise guru, Aaron Leventhal to the Not Old Better Show Fitness Friday interview series. Aaron Leventhal, author, fitness guru. I am looking forward to our conversation, but first of all, welcome to the show.
Paul, thanks for having me. I'm a fan of the show, and I'm super excited to be on.
Well, thank you so much. Your new book, The New Fit, I just think it is fantastic. We'll have links so that our audience can find out more about you, more about the book. I have a general question, which you treat very specifically, which I thought was brilliant on your part. And that is, you say in the book, The New Fit, that fitness isn't just a one-size-only proposition. And I think that's so true, especially for our audience who are over 40, 50, 60 years of age. What are the big mistakes that people make when they think of, well, I'm just going to go out and get started on fitness?
What I would call attention to is saying, ask yourself these questions. If you're pulling in a movement practice right now, you've already got something that is working or that you enjoy doing, I would say, ask yourself these questions. Number one, is this something that you enjoy? This is baseline. You should enjoy your practice. You should say, I'm connected to it. You should feel like I'm looking forward to whatever it is that I'm doing, to taking whatever class I'm taking, to being part of whatever it is. And when you look forward to it, you want to get better at it. So that's first principles by far, that point of connection. And then I want to follow it up and say, here's some basic boxes for listeners to check when it comes to their movement practice. Number one, do you have a warm-up? And is that warm-up specific to your needs, especially as we age? We have to begin to identify, what are we bringing into a movement practice? Is it a hip? Is it a knee? Is it something that is chronic? And you have to address those on a daily basis. Number one. Number two, any movement practice has to address this is what we would call zone 2 cardio or cardiovascular health, which is like long endurance. Could be a long walk, could be a long hike. Zone 4, high intensity intervals. That just means getting out of breath. Doesn't mean I have to sprint. It just means I got to get my heart rate elevated. Then number 3, we have to think about a practice that includes balance and mobility. And then the last thing, number 4, and this is probably the most important, I'm sure we'll talk about this later, is a meaningful, progressive strength training practice. And we can dive into that a little later in our talk. But I would say, hey, look, ask yourself those 4 questions. If you're thinking of getting engaged, it should include those bits and pieces.
I love that. I really like the emphasis on balance because that's so important for people in my audience and in my age group. We're subject to falls. We might have some functional movement that means reaching up higher on a shelf. And so the balance part of it just becomes so essential. And in a lot of ways, I think the answer to this next question is some of what you've said already, which has been so helpful. What do we do when we're feeling stuck? We have a minor injury that we're recovering from, and we lack a little bit of motivation. We hear that term all the time, plateau. What do we do in order to reverse that, to stay on track, in order to try some of these tips and keep moving forward?
Your fitness practice, when you get stuck, you have to be open. And this is where we get caught. You have to be open to new ideas, new thoughts, new concepts, different ways to move. A lot of getting stuck is this idea of monotony. We are so used to just checking the box on our practice that we don't give it a lot of thought. We don't pay attention to how we feel. And I always encourage people to go back to the basics. It's not so much about what you do, it's how it makes you feel. And so that might mean I've been swimming for the past 2 years and geez, I'm just not that connected to it. I don't feel like it's doing anything for me anymore. But we just have a tendency to just keep going back, go back because we check the box. I encourage people to say, I liked swimming because I did it with a group. It was part of a community. So can you find a community that practices fitness in a different way? I mean, that's one example, but there's so many different examples that we can use to say, like, how should I look at reinventing my practice? Don't look at what you do. Look at how it makes you feel. And that'll be your point of connection.
That's great. Thank you. The other thing that I found so helpful in your book, again, the title of which is The New Fit. I've got a copy of it here. Thank you so much for sharing with me. The full title, which is fantastic for our audience, is The New Fit, How to Own Your Fitness Journey in Your 40s, 50s, and Beyond. So relevant for our audience, but you really tackle a science-based approach, which I think is really on the minds of a lot of people in our audience. They want to do something that connects their body with their movement and with their practice, as you put it. What is it that you would tell us about our 20s and our 30s from a science perspective that's just so different from our bodies when we're hitting those 40s and 50s and beyond?
In our 20s and 30s, it was easy to move, adopt any kind of movement practice, and see results. I mean, right? I mean, do what he's doing. It works. Sure, I'll jump in. Now we're dealing with so many different comorbidities, and we bring injuries and exercise and health history to the table that we really have to give this some thought. I mean, here's some interesting numbers. At the age of 40, every decade, you're going to lose 7% of your lean muscle mass.
Wow.
And if you're like that, okay, big deal. Well, understand that there's so much research around longevity, functional longevity, and lean muscle. And so that's significant. Bone density drops. It drops at a rate where you're no longer able to produce bone density at the rate that it's falling. That can become dangerous. And now falls are all of a sudden go from bruises to broken bones. And in general, our hormones are on a steep decline after we hit 40. Two things. Number one, we have to find ways to kind of catch up. That's why progression is so important in your movement practice. And then number two, we have to be aware of some of the changes that we need to make in order to counter some of these things. And this is kind of going back to strength training.
Well, let's touch on that because you mentioned that just earlier in your tips. And I just think that's so important as well. You also have a science approach to that too. And so tell us a little bit about strength training and your philosophy behind it and why lifting weights is just such an essential part of our movement practice as we get a little bit older.
Yeah, it's so important because it actually is one of the only natural ways that we can rebuild bone density and increase lean muscle and change metabolism. Strength training is important. And here's what I tell people who are over the age of 40, 50, 60, 70, and beyond, is that before you begin a strength training practice, lifting weights, really spend some time building the skill of movement. That might take some time because safety is really important, especially when you start to load joints. Loading joints means that I'm going to have an external load, a dumbbell, a kettlebell, a can of soup that I'm pulling. But what I really have to do is understand that that external load puts tension on my muscle and pressure on my joint. And so I need to have the skill of understanding how to move so that my joints stay stable and I'm utilizing muscles in the right way. I'll use my mom, for example. My mom's 87 years old. She's never had a strength training practice. About 7 years ago, her knee started to hurt and she fell. So to build her way back up, she had to first start to learn how to move appropriately. That meant stuff like, how do I get up and down off the floor effectively? How do I hold something over my head or reach for something? And then once she learned those movements without any weight, then you progress very slowly to loading the joint using a light dumbbell or a band. And then it becomes progressive. Now my mom can lift 15, 20-pound dumbbells at 87 years old, and she's healthy.
This goes without saying, but I want to emphasize it because I do think that it's so important to involve a fitness professional, because we all think, well, I move okay. I can get up from my chair. But I think it's something entirely different to have a fitness professional look at us as we're walking or look at us as we're lifting, because our body might not be aligned. And that's the whole science approach that you take with this, that are our muscles really doing the things that they should be doing in a way that's going to be beneficial to us?
That's exactly right. And there's so many great resources for us. There's so many great classes. There's so many great coaches. There's online websites. There's programs that we can follow that help us. But what I will say is finding a coach who really understands and knows movement for your demographic, for your population.
Yeah.
It's so important and so key. And it doesn't have to be forever. But it's like, we don't learn to play guitar, learn the skill of playing guitar, go to someone who can teach you. And it's the same thing with strength training.
I remember a time when I'd check my bank account and wonder where all my money had gone. I was working hard, but I wasn't being smart about how I saved or invested. Today's episode is sponsored by Acorns. Acorns is a financial wellness app that helps you take control of your money with simple tools that make it easy to start saving and investing for your future. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns will recommend a diversified portfolio that matches you and your money goals. You don't need to be rich. Acorns lets you get started with the spare money you've got right now, even if all you've got is spare change. I've talked about Acorns before. I love the company. And that's because I believe in what they do. It's helped me shift my mindset. Investing doesn't have to be complicated or intimidating. It's about making the most of what you already have, one step at a time. That's what I love about Acorns. So head to acorns.com/NOB or download the Acorns app to get started. Paid client endorsement. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/NOB. Wonderful stuff. Again, our guest today is author, fitness guru, Aaron Leventhal, who has written this fantastic new book. Talk about being relevant to our age group, titled The New Fit: How to Own Your Fitness Journey in Your 40s, 50s, and Beyond. Aaron, we're going to have links in our show notes today so that our audience can find out a lot more about you. I thought the book was fantastic, but I'm not the only one. This quote from Gabrielle Reese, the Olympic volleyball star, says it all in just a very quick review. I just want to read. The New Fit is a totally new way to look at your fitness. Aaron's philosophy is welcoming and effective. The New Fit is the guide we all need as we age in order to reclaim our health, wellness, and fitness. Congrats on the book. I think that this is wonderful stuff. I got a couple questions that I want to talk to you about with regard to the emotional state of fitness. And you've had a really fascinating journey, and I want to touch on that too. You alluded to this earlier when we're thinking about ways to stay engaged with our fitness. And it comes down to this question. I mean, do you enjoy it? Are you out with people that you enjoy being with? Tell us a little bit about the emotional aspects of fitness, because that allows us to rediscover some of the joy too, especially if we're doing some things in a way that connects us to others, which I think so many of us need, especially after COVID when we were just all shut-ins.
That's right. Yeah. Fitness a lot of times plays out in an emotional way. Fitness was not designed to be painful and to begrudgingly go do it. The way that you should look at your fitness practice is, again, you should look forward to it. It should be something that you enjoy. And it plays out in community. It plays out in camaraderie. It plays out in being connected to a leader or a good coach. Yes, 100%. But for some people, it can play out in solitude. It can play out in finding some alone time. It's really dependent on who you are and what you need and how you feel. But I will say this, is that a fitness practice is a wonderful way to look at how other patterns in your life, your relationships, the way you connect, the things that you're afraid of, those things tend to play themselves out inside of a fitness practice as well. What I love about it is now this becomes a really safe place to work on you to sort of self assess. When used correctly, it can be a wonderful tool, not only to gain strength and to become healthier and more fit, but it can be a great tool to become a better person and to become more self-aware. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I think there are some real applicable aspects of fitness and what the impact is on our emotional health and well-being. You've really had this fascinating journey, and I want to touch on that a little bit. It was a tough one, yet you used fitness to overcome some of those really difficult challenges with a healthcare scare that I think all of us, especially as we age, are worried about. I wonder if you tell us a little bit about that and tell us how you apply some of that thinking that you learned to your fitness program today, as well as to your fitness clientele.
Yeah, happy to share. So, personal story, about 2 years ago, I woke up, I felt a lump in my chest, my lymph nodes were swollen, and I was diagnosed with cancer. 2 weeks later, I had surgery and I was on treatment for a year, and I'm happy to say I'm healthy now, which was great. That was half the battle, was coming back from that experience. But the other half the battle was understanding emotionally how I can use fitness to sort of get unstuck. I mean, I was in a place in my life. I mean, Paul, understand that I was a professional athlete for 8 years.
Right.
I was
Soccer.
all, yeah, soccer player. So fitness was my life for since I can remember. This stopped me in my tracks. Now, yes, physically, I could use the science to kind of make my way back physically, and that was easy for me to do. Emotionally, it was challenging. Anxiety and depression, some of the side effects of treatment, but really understanding myself, again, going back to using my fitness practice as a way to be self-reflective, that's where I learned the most. In the book, I talk about you're an overtrainer or an undertrainer and different characteristics for different types of people. My whole life, I've been an overtrainer, an overreacher, an overworker, and it's been my superpower, but it's also been my Achilles heel. And it didn't really show up until after I was diagnosed, and I had to make adjustments. And the hardest thing for me to do was to adjust my movement practice, to get myself to a place where my movement practice wasn't bringing me down. It was pushing me up. And it took a lot of work. It took a lot of emotional work. Still working on it.
Well, we're glad that you are, and my best to you. And I hope that this good health continues. And I think you're a good example and inspiration for us to keep pushing through things and use the science part of this, as you suggest, but also, value the emotional parts of it that can take us down, but can bring us right back up again. So let's talk about pushing through some barriers. They're everywhere, and they can be health related. They can challenge us in so many different. In the book, you talk about the intensity gap that comes in terms of making progress during our workouts. That too changes between our 20s and our 30s and our 40s and beyond. How do we measure our progress as we get a little older? What should we look at to really try and say to ourselves, okay, I'm pushing through, I'm overcoming some of these barriers?
Great question. And the first thing I want to do is I want people to understand, what is the intensity gap? The intensity gap is the gap between where you are right now, how you view intensity, and then what your ceiling is, sort of like what your genetic ceiling is. That gap exists for all of us. Now, the more experience we have, the closer we understand how far we can push ourselves. The less experience we have in fitness, the further we are from that gap. And I will say this, it's scary, and it can be scary. You have breath, be scared to feel your heart beating in your chest. And so the most appropriate way to make up that gap is very slowly, really, really slowly, a little bit more each time. That's the first thing. The second thing is the science is important here. The norms are important here. So in my book, here's how I address it. I've identified these 5 fitness tests, but instead of taking traditional fitness tests, what I've done is I picked cultures around the world where people are living longer. They have less comorbidity. There's less early onset of disease. And these studies have found a way to measure some kind of fitness, upper body strength endurance, lower body strength endurance, mobility. And it's reflective of the culture that is living longer. You take one of these studies, you can compare yourself now to appropriate age and demographic of people who might look like you and be your age. And now you have real tangible information that you want to use to move forward. The last thing I'll say is that having that information, having the right norms to compare yourself to is really important, because as we age, it's really hard to find norms for my mom who's 87 years old. It's hard to find, like, how many push-ups should you be able to do? How many times should you be able to sit down and stand up? What I've done is I've found those norms. And so you should know, because starting a movement practice, most of us will stop because it's either too hard, we're not seeing the results, or it's too boring. And so this gets you started on the right path.
Check this book out, Aaron Leventhal, the author of The New Fit, How to Own Your Fitness Journey in Your 40s, 50s, and Beyond. I just have a couple other questions for you, Aaron, to wrap up some stuff for us. But my wife and I just had our first grandchild, and that is motivation for being a little more fit. We're gonna have to keep up with somebody here who's a lot younger than us, and all of us in my age demographic, we all have our various levels of motivation. But what about starting at square one and feeling this overwhelm? I mean, when I look at that little grandbaby of mine and I just think to myself, I'm going to need to pick him up for the next few years. And so that gives me a sense that I got to do some things that keep me in shape enough to do that. And then it doesn't sound so overwhelming. So what about those of us that are really just feeling the first time overwhelms?
Well, first of all, congratulations.
Yeah,
Amazing. It's
thank you.
so great.
It is.
Nothing better. I'll say that it's really important that as you set these goals, and what I love about your story is that you have found what most people would call a learning opportunity. So you see your grandson, and now all of a sudden there is something inside of you that makes you want to be around, want to be able to play with. That's internal motivation. And so I would encourage listeners to pay attention to that. And the second thing is, you're talking about the right starting point. And I tell people this: if you don't have a movement practice, if it seems overwhelming, do 60% of what you think you should do. It's usually the right starting point. I think I'm not fit. I think I got to go walk 5 miles today. Take 60% of that. Start there and understand that progression has to be slow. It has to be extremely slow, because you have to still allow your body to recover in order to adapt.
In addition to feeling overwhelmed by fitness and getting off the couch, starting, even if it's like just at a very modest level, and getting that 60% in mind and focus on it, I think a lot of us focus on the aesthetics of exercise, what I might look like, the weight loss that might come, maybe my appearance. You don't really like to focus so much on that. And so tell us a little bit about what are some of the benefits that we're going to get, but we might overlook them.
Yeah, I mean, that's 100% right. Training for aesthetics, adopting a movement practice for the way you look, or only for weight loss, oftentimes it's not sustainable, but it can be a byproduct of a sustainable movement practice that you enjoy, that involves camaraderie, involves community. Fitness does so much more than create external motivations. It creates internal change, more creativity, more emotional presence, being connected to a community or a group. There's so many things. This is the real juice of a good fitness practice. Those things, those points of connection or internal change, those are the things that create sustainability and deep meaning. The byproduct is I look better, I feel better, I move better. Those are the byproducts.
So helpful. It's such a great opportunity to talk with you and not only be reminded, but to learn some of these really wonderful, important new concepts that you're sharing in the New Fit, how to own your fitness journey in your 40s, 50s, and beyond. One final question for our guest, Aaron Leventhal, today. The book is fantastic. Again, I just want to encourage it. But one of the things I thought was so wonderful in it is you have this fitness checkup that you talk about and you refer to. So I wonder if you just end our conversation by telling us what the fitness checkup is and what we really should be paying attention to on that checkup so that we get the tips and the biggest bang for our buck, so to speak.
There's 5 simple tests. You can do them at home. You don't need any equipment. You can do all 5. You can do one of them. Do what feels comfortable to you. There's an upper body strength endurance test, and that's for people who can push their own body weight up and down off the floor. There's a lower body strength endurance test, which would mean you'd have to sit down and stand up from a chair. There is a mobility and a balance test, which is getting up and down off the floor without using your hands. That's my worst one. There's a grip strength test, and then there's a cardiovascular health test as well. All these tests give you a picture of where you fit inside your age and demographic amongst people who are already expressing functional longevity. I want to make that really clear. It's people who are already living into their 90s. They're functional, they're strong. Some of the movements are easy to execute, but I think readers will find that they will be surprised at the demands of some of the norms that they see. And if I can share one of the tests with your listeners, I would love to.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So my favorite test is the sit to stand test. It's done to an 18-inch box. This was a study done by the Swiss government. I think it was a 2017 study. 7,000 people participated in the study from the age of 40 to 64. This is from a culture that has an 87% activity rate, meaning like 87% of the culture in that demographic, they're active people. I think they're in the top 3 in the world in life expectancy, bottom 3 in overall healthcare costs. So they're winning. They're doing it right. They asked 7,000 people to sit and stand as many times as they could in 1 minute. And here's what was interesting, is that they correlated their score with heart disease, and they determined that because the mean number, not the average number, was 50 squats in a minute.
Wow.
And what they determined was the risk of heart disease went down by 32% if you were at or above that number. So I don't know if your listeners are interested, but if you're interested, put a timer on yourself and see how many times you can get up and down off your chair. And if it's 50, amazing, you're doing great. And if it's not 50, don't worry. There's a path forward for you.
Thank you. That was fantastic. What a great tip to wrap with. Aaron Leventhal has been our guest, fitness expert and author of this fantastic new book, The New Fit, How to Own Your Fitness Journey in Your 40s, 50s, and Beyond. We will have links so that everybody can find out more information, how to do the self-assessment tests that Aaron's got in his book, but check the book out. Aaron, thanks for being so generous with your time. Congrats on the book. As you do more work in this area of longevity and health and wellness for my age group, we would love to have you back.
Thanks, Paul. It was a pleasure being here. You are phenomenal, and I loved the show, and so I would love to come back on.
My thanks to Acorns for sponsoring today's show. Acorns makes it easy for everyone to start saving and investing. My thanks to Aaron Leventhal for his generous time and excellent advice for our audience. Remember to check out Aaron Leventhal and his new book available at Apple Books, The New Fit, Aaron Leventhal on strength, longevity, and reinventing fitness after 40. My thanks to Sam and Miranda Hanniger, who team up to help me keep going. I need them too. My thanks to you, our wonderful audience here on radio and podcasts, especially for these very special Fitness Friday editions. Please be well, be safe. Let's talk about better. The Not Old Better Show on radio and podcast, our Fitness Friday interview series. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Not Old Better Show. To find out more about all of today's stories or to view our extensive back catalog of previous shows, simply visit notold-better.com. Join us again next time as we deep dive into some of the most fascinating real-life stories from across the world, all focused on this wonderful experience of getting better, not just older. Let's talk about better. The Not Old Better Show.
Hi, one final thing. Please check out our website for this episode and all episodes at notold-better.com or subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, and be sure to check out your local radio stations to find out more about the Not Old Better Show on podcast and radio. You can find us all over social media. Our Twitter feed is Not Old Better, and we're on Instagram at Not Old Better too. The Not Old Better Show is a production of NOBS Studios. I'm Paul Vogelzang, and I hope you'll join me again next time to talk about better. The Not Old Better Show. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.